I heard a story once about a particular rabbi who, when he was a little boy, used to eat ice cream with a toothpick, so that he just got like a, tiny, tiny, tiny piece of ice cream with every bite. And once when my son was eating ice cream voraciously, I told him about this particular guy. He thought it was kind of interesting. And a few months later, when he was having his ice cream treat on Shabbat probably, I saw him eating it with a toothpick. And I was amazed that he had kind of taken this on. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, you told me about that rabbi that was eating with a toothpick. I thought it was a good idea." There's a dynamic that you can see with kids, you might be familiar with this, where they want things, and if you give it to them, rather than be really satisfied and grateful, often they'll want a little more. And then if you give them a little more and they want a little more, what's that called? What?
The hedonic treadmill.
Yes, right. So, and some people call it getting spoiled, right? And this is kind of a, this ironic thing about how our desires work, that if we're not careful, then the satisfaction of something, rather than leading to a deep satisfaction, can lead to the opposite and need to kind of be filled more and more. And so I know for myself, in relation to my kids, there's this strong desire to give and give and give, because you want to give happiness, you want to give satisfaction. And the trick is that you can see easily in that situation that sometimes in order to give more, you have to give less, because otherwise there's not time for this appreciation, this enjoyment to blossom. So it's easy to see it with kids, but actually with ourselves, this is something very practical we can work with. When we have some kind of impulse arise, and it doesn't have to be a desire to eat something, right? It could be a desire to say something, or a desire to try to stop something that you don't like. Like there's something in our environment that's annoying, and we want to stop it because we're feeling an irritation. Whatever it is, whatever kind of the impulse is, whether it's a positive thing or a negative thing, if we wait a little bit and allow ourselves to just kind of be in the discomfort, then there can be this blossoming that happens that doesn't have time to happen or doesn't have a space to happen. There's a line from the Parsha that's coming up in this week that says, Lo al halechem levado, not on bread alone, yichyeh ha'adam, does a person live. So in other words, if a person wants to really live, really experience life, then it's not just about the consuming of the bread, of the nourishment. And if we think of it kind of as a metaphor, so that it's not just physical bread we're talking about, but it could be anything that actually arises in our experience, anything in our awareness that becomes an object, either of desire, something that we want, or something that we actively don't want, that we want to push away. That's the thing. There's this sense of me, and then there's the perception of something. Let's just say it's a piece of really good baguette, whatever. And then there's the impulse, whatever the impulse is that's right. I want to reach for that. So, lo al halechem lavado, not on bread alone. In other words, not on the object of our awareness, not on whatever it is we're thinking about or perceiving or fixating on or wanting or not wanting, But not on that alone is the basis of life. So what's the other piece there in the equation that we often ignore is the awareness that's perceiving the piece of bread. And the awareness that we have is always there. And so it's very easy to become unconscious of it, because no matter what's going on, there's always this awareness that's there. So we just kind of take it for granted. And yet, this awareness has within it this tremendous welcome. This tremendous potential for deep satisfaction, a kind of satisfaction and a depth of peace that is totally beyond anything you can get from a big bite of ice cream or a little bite of ice cream. And so, in fact, when we restrict ourselves and put the toothpick in the ice cream and take a little bit, it doesn't automatically happen, but there's an opportunity to notice the noticing, to notice the awareness within which the perception of the ice cream arises, within which the perception of the desire for something arises. It's a little bit like if you bend your tongue over and try to taste your own tongue. It doesn't taste like much because your tongue is always there. But when you start to become aware of your own awareness, start to see if you can taste the flavor of your own tasting, so to speak. Not just tasting, but the root of tasting, the root of seeing, the root of hearing, the root of smelling, the root of thinking, the place from which thought arises. It's all coming from this space. And in this space, there's already this sense of wholeness, of satisfaction, that isn't dependent on anything out there. And you can prove it to yourself by restricting those things sometimes. We just had this sort of anti-holiday of Tisha B'Av, and coming up pretty soon is Yom Kippur, for which the primary practice is restricting oneself, not satisfying your impulse. Has anyone had the experience during Yom Kippur of just getting deeply elevated, even though you're hungry? Has anyone had that? Yeah. It can happen. Sometimes people get afraid. Oh my God, I don't know if I can fast that long. I don't know if I can, But actually, very often, for many people anyway, the letting go of that satisfying of that impulse allows something else to happen. You might not even understand intellectually what's happening. You start to feel high, you start to feel elevated. But a way to understand it is that you're beginning to taste the place from which the impulse arises. Yeah, there's hunger, but how do you know you're hungry? You know it because it's a feeling that's perceived, and your perception is like a field, an open field of consciousness or of awareness that has this quality of peace, of being unrestrained, unconstricted. It's not in a particular form. It's not stuck in your body, even at this moment, as we're all sitting here, and you're aware of your body sitting perhaps. Maybe you're aware of the feeling of the dog against you there. Nice feeling. But we can also hear things far away, like that train that came by. And there's this ambient sound outside of the traffic, different things, sense of each other in the room, the space, the shape of the building. All these things are, what are they really? Are they somehow separate from your own consciousness? So at least in our perception of them, they're not separate at all. Everything we perceive is living in this field of awareness.